My sister posted a poll online about my 9-year-old daughter. What's worse, her crooked haircut or her nasty attitude? Family voted and made fun of her in the comment section while she was crying in the bathroom. When I found out I didn't cry, I did this. 5 hours later, they regretted everything. My name is Diana Collins and I'm 35 years old. On paper, my life is exactly what I planned. A good job as a project manager, a loving husband named Eric, and a bright, funny 9-year-old daughter, Piper. My days are a neat series of tasks and timelines, managed with the kind of efficiency that gets me promotions. But my spreadsheets don't show the second job I never applied for, the one with no salary and endless hours. Being the financial backbone for my mother and my sister, Monica, every month, a significant chunk of my $102,000 salary is automatically diverted before I even see it, like a tax I've imposed on myself. There's the $1,100 for my mom's mortgage payment. It's been 5 years since that started, a temporary fix that became a permanent fixture. Then there's another $320 to cover her utilities because she always seems to come up short, a phrase that sounds more like a lifestyle choice than a surprise. And then there's the Monica Fund, an unpredictable drain, a black hole that usually sucks in around $700 a month to keep her struggling hair salon afloat. I tell myself it's a loan, a running tab that she'll one day settle. But we both know it's a lifeline, and I'm the one paying for the privilege of holding it out to her month after month. Eric asks me sometimes, usually late at night when the bills are spread across the kitchen table, why I do it. Why I let them treat my generosity like an obligation they're entitled to. My answer is always the same, a single word that explains everything: Piper. I want her to have what I didn't, a big, bustling family with grandparents, aunts, and cousins at every holiday. I want her to have memories of Thanksgiving dinners that don't end in slammed doors and Christmas mornings filled with shared laughter, not simmering resentments. I'm willing to pay for that illusion, to swallow the casual insults and the constant manufactured emergencies that always seem to coincide with my payday. It's the price of admission, the cost of keeping the peace. I have a photo on my desk from last Thanksgiving. Everyone is smiling, their faces turned toward the camera in a perfect tableau of family harmony. But I remember the tense minutes just before the timer went off. Mom had criticized my gravy, calling it thin, and Monica had snickered at the dress I was wearing, asking if I got it from the back of my closet. I'd smoothed it over like always with a tight smile and a quick change of subject. In the picture, my smile is the widest and it's also the most fake. That photo is the story of my life. A perfect-looking family that costs me a small fortune in every sense of the word to maintain. On Friday afternoon, the phone rang and Monica's name flashed on the screen. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a treacly tone she always uses right before she asks for something. I braced myself for another tale of slow sales or an unexpectedly high supplier bill. But she wasn't asking for money, not this time. She wanted to give Piper a super trendy, edgy haircut at her salon for free. She claimed it would be great practice for a new style she was trying to perfect, something that would make Piper the coolest kid in her class. A small, cold knot of suspicion tightened in my stomach. Monica's favors often came with hidden barbs, acts of kindness that were really just setups for a later punchline. But Piper, my daughter, overheard the conversation from the other room and her eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. She'd been talking for weeks about wanting to do something different with her long, straight hair. Against my better judgment, against the alarm bells screaming in my head, I said yes. I chose my daughter's immediate happiness over my own deeply ingrained intuition. I drove her to the salon that evening, the little bell over the door chiming as we entered. Monica showered Piper with praise, calling her a little rock star, and after the cut was done, she had her own daughter, Zoe, my niece, take a smiling picture of Piper. For a moment, watching my daughter preen in the salon chair, I let myself believe it was a genuine act of kindness, a rare moment of pure, uncomplicated family connection. I came home from a grocery run Saturday evening to a house that was too quiet. The silence was thick, unnatural. Usually on a weekend, I'd hear the tinny sound effects from Piper's tablet or the sound of her chattering away to our golden retriever buddy. Tonight, there was nothing. The air was still and heavy. I called her name, my voice echoing a little in the entryway. Piper? No answer. A prickle of unease ran up my spine. I dropped the grocery bags on the kitchen counter, the cans clanking loudly in the stillness, and walked upstairs. My steps felt loud on the wooden stairs, each one amplifying the silence. Her bedroom door was cracked open just a few inches, a sliver of dim light escaping into the hall. I pushed it open gently. I found her curled up on her bed, her small body shaking with silent, racking sobs. Her face was buried in her pillow, and she was clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles were white. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't meet my eyes. She just pushed the phone into my hand, her little fingers trembling against mine. And that's when I saw it. The image on the glowing screen wasn't just a picture, it was a jolt, an electric shock that ended the carefully constructed, expensive world I'd been paying to hold together for years. On the screen was an Instagram poll from Monica's salon page. It was the picture Zoe had taken the night before. Piper was in the salon chair, smiling hesitantly, her hair a hacked, crooked mess. The layers were uneven, one side was visibly shorter than the other, and a chunk near the front looked like it had been chopped off with garden shears. The caption underneath read, "What's worse? The terrible haircut or the bratty attitude that came with it?" The two poll options were simple and brutal: bad hair and bad attitude. My breath caught in my chest. Bad attitude was winning by a landslide with over 100 votes. I scrolled down, my thumb shaking so badly I could barely control it. The comments were a sea of laughing emojis and cruel jokes posted by distant relatives I barely knew and Monica's salon friends. "Looks like she lost a fight with a lawnmower," one wrote. "That's what happens when you raise a spoiled kid," another chimed in. My sister, my own sister, had taken my daughter's trust, her sweet 9-year-old excitement, and turned it into a public spectacle for cheap laughs. I scrolled back up to the photo, to Piper's hopeful, trusting face, and a cold, hard fury I hadn't felt in years began to solidify in my gut. This wasn't a joke, it was a public execution, and my daughter was the victim. The tactic was sickeningly familiar. It was a pattern, a cruel game she had perfected over decades with me as her primary target. I was suddenly 16 again, standing in my bedroom, crying over the designer purse I'd saved up for months to buy. Monica had borrowed it without asking for a party. She returned it with a huge, indelible ink stain right on the front, a black smear on the pale leather. When I broke down, she didn't apologize. She laughed. She called all her friends and told them I was materialistic and dramatic, that I cared more about a stupid bag than about her. "It's just a bag," she'd said, her lips curled into that familiar smirk, the one that said she'd won. She'd done the same thing with my first boyfriend, flirting with him relentlessly until he broke up with me, then telling everyone I was too clingy. She did it with my college acceptance letter, accidentally spilling coffee on it before I could show Mom. She did it with my first big job promotion, whispering to relatives that I must have done something unethical to get it. She would celebrate me to my face, her voice dripping with false pride, and then systematically tear me down behind my back, always framing my hurt reaction as the real problem. She hadn't changed at all, she just found a new, smaller, more vulnerable target, my daughter. I held Piper until she cried herself to sleep, my own tears silently soaking into her hair. I whispered that it wasn't her fault, that she was beautiful, that I loved her more than anything. I told her she was strong and kind, and that the people who did this were the ones who were ugly on the inside. Once her breathing evened out and her small body went limp in my arms, I gently laid her down and pulled the covers up to her chin. Then I went back to the phone. With a cold, methodical precision, I started taking screenshots of everything: the poll, the votes, every single vicious comment. I documented it all. When Eric came home, I showed him. His face hardened as he scrolled through the images. Eric, my husband, is a software developer, and he showed me how to look more closely at the accounts that had voted. It didn't take him long to discover that a significant number of them were burner accounts, fake profiles created that same day with no friends or other posts. Their only purpose was to inflate the votes and make the humiliation seem more widespread. This was premeditated. Then the final blow came. A cousin of mine, someone who had always been kinder than the rest, sent me a text. "I'm so sorry, Diana, I saw this. You need to see it too." It was a screenshot from a separate family group chat, one I wasn't a part of. In it, my own mother was laughing about the poll. "It's just harmless fun," Mom wrote. "Monica should post it right before Piper's bedtime so she sees it when she's alone." My mother, she hadn't just allowed it to happen, she'd helped orchestrate it for maximum pain. The betrayal was absolute. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room, the pale blue glow of my laptop screen illuminating the gallery of screenshots I'd saved to my desktop. Each one was a piece of evidence, a testament to a cruelty I could no longer ignore or explain away. The family I'd been funding, the one I'd sacrificed my peace of mind and my savings for, wasn't a family at all. It was a machine that consumed my money and my daughter's spirit with equal, casual greed. They weren't just flawed. They were toxic. As the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the blinds, I made a decision. It felt less like a choice and more like a law of physics, an inevitable reaction to an unbearable pressure. I was done paying for my own abuse. I was done subsidizing my daughter's pain. I opened my banking app, my fingers moving with a steady, determined calm. I navigated to the scheduled payments section. I found the automatic transfer for Mom's $1,100 mortgage. The screen asked, "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment?" I tapped confirm without a flicker of hesitation. I found the $320 for her utilities. Confirm. I found the recurring transfer I used to top up Monica's salon account whenever she sent a desperate text. Confirm. In less than 5 minutes, with a series of quiet, deliberate taps on a glass screen, I dismantled the entire financial structure that had propped them up for years. The silence in the house was no longer empty or unnerving. It was powerful. It was the sound of my own freedom. The next morning, I woke Piper gently and told her we were having a mental health day. No school, no chores, just us. Our first stop was the best salon in the city, a chic, airy place I normally couldn't justify the expense for. The air inside smelled of expensive shampoo and fresh flowers. I explained the situation quietly to the receptionist, a woman with kind eyes who immediately understood. She assigned us to their senior stylist, a warm woman named Chloe. Chloe led Piper to a big, comfortable chair and treated her like a queen, draping the cape around her with a flourish. She told Piper she had beautiful, strong hair and that together they would find a style that made her feel amazing. She never once mentioned the bad haircut directly, only referring to it as an in-between style that they could transform into something magical. Piper, hesitant at first, slowly began to relax. She flipped through a magazine and pointed to a picture of an actress with a chic, layered bob. Chloe smiled. "Excellent choice," she said. "That will look stunning on you." For the next hour, Chloe worked her magic, her scissors snipping with a confident, rhythmic sound. She talked to Piper about school and her dog, making her laugh. When she finally turned Piper around to face the mirror, my daughter's eyes widened in disbelief. She touched her new, perfectly shaped hair, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. The reflection staring back at her was a cool, confident kid, not a victim. The $180 I spent was more than a haircut, it was an act of restoration. I was paying to give my daughter her own reflection back. That afternoon, while Piper was happily engrossed in a movie curled on the couch with Buddy, I sat down at my computer. It was time for the next step. I opened the Facebook page for the Westwood Elementary Parents Group, a private online network of 86 local parents. It was the digital town square for our school community, a place where people asked for babysitter recommendations and organized fundraisers. Monica was a member, so were most of her clients. I began to type, choosing my words with the cold precision of a project manager outlining risks. I would not be emotional, I would be factual. I started with a simple, anonymous warning, a shot across the bow. A word of caution for parents considering a local salon for their children's haircuts, I wrote. I described in clear and dispassionate terms how a local business owner had not only given a child a botched haircut but had then used a photo of that child to mock them publicly online in a social media poll. I detailed the cruelty of the poll and the devastating emotional impact it had on the child. I kept it general, laying the groundwork and building a foundation of shared outrage. I didn't use any names, not yet. My post was a carefully placed landmine in the middle of their primary source of new business. I was just waiting for someone to step on it. It didn't take long. Within 10 minutes, the comments started flooding in, a cascade of notifications on my screen. Parents were horrified, disgusted. "That's monstrous," one mother wrote. Another asked the inevitable question, the one I was waiting for, "Which salon was this? Please tell us so we can avoid it." This was the opening I needed. I replied directly to her comment. "Since you asked," I typed, my fingers steady on the keyboard. It was Monica's style studio on Main Street. The digital fuse was lit. A moment later, another parent, a woman I knew was a friend of Monica's, chimed in, trying to do damage control. "There must be a misunderstanding," she wrote. "Monica loves kids." I can't imagine her ever doing something like that. I responded to her comment directly, making sure everyone in the group would see my reply. "There is no misunderstanding." And then I uploaded the evidence. I attached the screenshots I had so carefully saved. The poll with its cruel question, the vicious comments from her friends and our relatives. My sister's name and the salon's logo were clearly visible for all 86 members to see. I let the images hang there in cyberspace, stark and undeniable. Then, as a final touch, I posted a picture of Piper's beautiful new haircut, her smile radiant. I captioned it. "This is what happens when a true professional steps in to fix the damage done by an unprofessional one." I didn't need to argue or raise my voice. I let the pictures do all the talking. The reaction in the group was explosive. It was like dropping a lit match into a puddle of gasoline. Phones all over our small town started lighting up. Parents were tagging each other in the comments, expressing their shock and disgust. "I'm horrified. This is cyberbullying. I will never set foot in that place again." Several mothers, now emboldened, began sharing their own, less severe, negative experiences with Monica's salon, stories of overpriced services, rude comments about their kids' behavior, and a history of last-minute cancellations. It turned out my story wasn't an isolated incident, it was just the most egregious example of a long-standing pattern. My post had opened a valve for all their own frustrations. My friend Sarah, one of the group administrators, sent me a private message almost immediately. "I'm so sorry this happened, Diana. That is beyond awful. I'm watching the thread. You have our full support." Then the real consequences began to roll in, visible to everyone. A mom posted, "Just canceled my color and cut appointment for Friday." Another followed seconds later, "Canceled mine too. And my 2 daughters." Within an hour, I watched as a dozen appointments vanished in real time. The parent network was a powerful referral engine, the lifeblood of a small business like Monica's. And I had just thrown a massive wrench into its gears. The boycott had begun. That evening, just as Eric and I were finishing the dinner dishes, my doorbell rang. It wasn't a friendly chime, but 3 sharp, angry jabs of the button. I didn't need to look through the peephole. I knew exactly who it was. I dried my hands on a dish towel, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. I opened it to find Monica and my mom standing on the porch, illuminated by the yellow glow of the porch light. Monica's face was blotchy with rage, her eyes narrowed to slits. Mom's face was arranged in a mask of wounded disappointment, a look she had perfected over years of emotional manipulation. "You need to fix this," Monica snarled, pushing past me into the entryway without being invited. Mom followed her in, wringing her hands in a theatrical display of distress. Eric appeared at my side, a solid, silent presence. He didn't say a word, just stood with his arms crossed, a human wall letting them know this was not the same house they were used to walking all over. "There's nothing to fix," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. They had come here expecting me to crumble, to apologize, to make it all go away like I always did. They were about to learn how much I had changed in 48 hours. Earlier that day, I had moved the folder with all my evidence from my office to the entryway table. I was prepared for this visit. "How could you?" Mom began, her voice quivering with practiced tears. "Airing our family business in public like that, trying to destroy your own sister over a silly joke." Her words were meant to shame me, to cast me as the cold-hearted aggressor. Monica picked up the thread, her voice rising with every word. "A joke? It was a stupid joke. My business is failing because of you. I've had 15 cancellations today. Do you have any idea what that means for me?" They stood there in my foyer, a two-woman tornado of blame and accusation. They demanded I take down the Facebook post immediately. They demanded an apology to them. And then, finally, came the real reason for their visit. "And you need to turn the money back on," Mom said, her tone shifting from hurt to demanding, the mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "The mortgage payment is due in 3 days. The utility bills are coming. We'll be on the street because of you." They painted me as the villain of their story, ungrateful, cruel, vindictive. It was the same script they'd always used, the one where my feelings were an overreaction and their needs were paramount. It was the script that had always worked on me before, but I wasn't playing my part anymore. "It wasn't a joke, Mom," I said, my voice cutting through her performance with the sharp edge of a razor. "It was cruelty, and you helped." Her performance faltered. I reached into the manila folder on the table and pulled out the first piece of paper. It was a clean, black and white printout of the screenshot from the family group chat. I held it up so she could see it clearly. I had even highlighted her own words in bright yellow. "Post it right before Piper's bedtime so she sees it when she's alone." Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. The fake tears vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine, panicked shock. She hadn't expected me to have proof. She hadn't expected me to come prepared. "You weren't an innocent bystander," I said, my eyes locked on hers. "You were a co-conspirator. You helped plan how to hurt my daughter the most." Monica glanced at the paper and then shot a look of pure fury at Mom. Their united front was already starting to crack under the weight of a single piece of paper. The power dynamic in the room had fundamentally, irreversibly shifted. I wasn't the accused anymore. I was the prosecutor, and I had the evidence in my hand. They quickly pivoted back to the money, their safest and most familiar ground. "Even so," Mom said, recovering slightly, her voice regaining a pleading tone. "You can't let me lose my house. I'm your mother. After everything I've done for you." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I spoke. "I've been paying for that house for 5 years," I replied evenly. "I've been happy to do it. I thought the extra money I sent was for the house, for repairs, for taxes. That's what you told me." I reached back into the folder and pulled out the second set of documents. Copies of my bank statements from the last year laid out next to copies of hers that I had access to from when I first set up the payments. I had highlighted 5 separate transfers, each for a large sum, totaling $8,400. The memos on my statements all read the same, "for the house." Then I showed them the matching withdrawals from Mom's account made on the same days for the exact same amounts paid directly to Monica's high-interest credit card. "You told me you were behind on the mortgage," I said, looking directly at my mother, letting her feel the full weight of my gaze. "You weren't. You were lying. You were taking money meant for your home and using it to pay for Monica's shopping sprees." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. This was the first reveal of their deeper, more calculated deception. I wasn't just their safety net, I was their secret slush fund. They had no defense. They just stared, completely and utterly exposed. They left without another word, their accusations and demands evaporating into stunned silence. The front door clicked shut behind them, and the quiet that filled the house felt different. It felt clean. I stood there in the entryway, the documents still in my hand, and I expected to feel a pang of guilt or regret, the familiar, conditioned ache of family strife. Instead, what I felt was a profound, overwhelming sense of relief, as if a massive weight I didn't even know I was carrying had been lifted from my chest. Eric wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "I have never been more proud of you," he whispered into my hair. His words, his unwavering support, solidified my resolve. I had spent my entire adult life trying to hold my broken family together with money and forced smiles. Now I realized my real job, my only job, was to protect the family standing right here in this house. The break wasn't just about money anymore. It was about my own survival and, more importantly, Piper's. For the first time, I saw their manipulation not as a personality flaw to be managed, but as a direct threat to be eliminated. I was finally completely done. That night, after the front door clicked shut and the house finally cooled from the heat of their anger, I went upstairs to tuck Piper in. Her new haircut fell around her face like a frame, soft and honest, and she looked smaller somehow in the dim light of her bedside lamp. She sat up when she saw me, hugging her pillow like a small, worried animal. "Are Grandma and Aunt Monica mad because of me?" she asked, voice small and careful, as if she'd learned the word blame and was testing whether it might stick to her. The question landed with the weight of a dropped plate. I sat on the edge of her bed and took her hands in mine. Her fingers were cold. She'd been worrying them the way some kids bite their nails. "No," I said, and I meant it in the cleanest way I could manage. "They're not mad because of you, they're mad because of choices they made. This has nothing to do with you being you." She looked at me like she wanted to believe it but needed proof, the way a child tests a bridge by tapping it with her toe. I told her the truth, but in pieces she could hold. I told her that sometimes grown-ups make mean choices and that sometimes people try to hurt others to feel better about themselves. I told her I had done something so she wouldn't have to worry about them anymore. She asked what that something was, and I explained simply that I had stopped sending money that kept them from learning how to take care of themselves. It sounded strange out loud even to me, but she nodded as if that made sense. "Will we still see them someday?" she asked, the question raw and hopeful. I stroked her hair and answered slowly, "Maybe. But not until they say they're sorry in a way that really means it. Right now, I need to keep you safe." She sighed, rolled over, and pulled the covers almost up to her chin. "Okay," she mumbled. "I trust you." The trust was everything. It tightened a knot in my chest and loosened one at the same time. I kissed her forehead and left the light on in the hall because some wounds take longer to mend than a bedtime. After Piper fell asleep and the house settled into that slow, steady breathing that means the worst of the day is over, I opened a new email. My hands didn't shake, my fingers were efficient, the same way they were at work. I didn't try to sugarcoat anything or make moral arguments. The message was short and absolute, directed at both Mom and Monica. "This is the last time you will hear from me," I wrote. "Until you are both willing to sit down and offer a genuine, face-to-face apology to Piper for what you did, you will have no access to her or to me. All communication is now suspended." I hit send and felt a tiny, fierce release inside my ribs. It wasn't dramatic, no slam of a door, no declaration from a mountaintop. It was an email, a boundary set in cold text and simple language. I didn't ask for an apology for myself. I made it entirely about Piper. Then I picked up my phone and did something I'd never done before. I blocked their numbers. I went through social media and blocked their profiles. I blocked Zoe's page too, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because lines were lines and there's no reason for my daughter to see the fallout of an argument between adults. Blocking felt final in a way that paying never did. It felt like putting a fence around the parts of my life that mattered most. I didn't snap pictures of the blocks to gloat or create evidence. I wanted no trail of petty drama. I wanted clean separation. After that, I walked into the living room where Eric was still awake, reading on the couch. He looked up when I came in, his face soft with a tired, protective hunger for peace. "It's over," I told him. He didn't need to ask how. He knew me well enough to know when I'd made a line in the sand. We talked about what would come next in quiet, practical ways, who would pick Piper up from soccer on Tuesday, whether we'd need to adjust savings, what friends we'd lean on. The fight had changed shape in my head. It wasn't about punishing Mom or Monica anymore. It was about building a life that didn't need them to be steady. I realized I'd been treating generosity as a cure when it had been a bandage. Bandages hide wounds, they don't heal them. My job was to make sure the bleeding stopped. So I made a plan, but it wasn't the kind you write on a spreadsheet. It was the kind you build with slow, daily acts. New holiday traditions, a calendar of visits with friends who actually showed up, after-school projects that meant something to Piper, bedtime stories that weren't interrupted by guilt trips. We would start small, movie nights with blankets and popcorn, a second Thanksgiving where we invited neighbors and hurried laughter, but we would build bigger things too. I wanted Piper to grow up knowing she belonged to people who respected her, not to people who took advantage of her smallness. The mission settled on me like armor. I would not be dragged back into that old pattern of debt and apology and backhanded compliments. I wouldn't trade peace for false smiles. I would teach Piper with my actions, not just my words, what protection looked like. That meant practical things, saving differently, making sure we had an emergency buffer stronger than what we'd had before, and emotional things, saying no when it mattered and teaching her to say it too. It meant investing more in the people who showed up and less in those who only showed up for their convenience. I wanted our home to be a place where she could be small and safe and mess up without being set up for ridicule. For several quiet days, I thought I'd caught my breath. Then, without warning, the whispers began. My phone buzzed with messages that felt like small stones thrown at the window. Sarah from the parent group called me first, her voice careful and low. "Hey," she said, then paused as if finding the right words. "I just wanted to give you a heads up. Monica's been telling people a different story." She sounded almost embarrassed to be the bearer of gossip. It was worse than that. Monica had spun a version where she was the wounded party, where I was the bitter corporate sister who'd targeted her small, struggling dream. She painted herself as the martyr who'd poured her life into a salon and been ruined by an irrational family vendetta. It spread fast, the way mud does on a windshield. A neighbor knocked on our door asking if we were okay. A woman from Piper's class texted that her mother was worried. The narrative Monica was selling omitted the poll entirely or twisted it into a tale of a jealous sister attacking a hardworking small business owner. People began to ask questions, and in the absence of facts, stories filled the space like fog. It stung, but it didn't surprise me. My family had always been better at performance than truth. What surprised me was how easily some people believed the simpler, sad story. It was a reminder that most folks prefer a neat villain rather than messy evidence, and that meant my work wasn't over. The mission had expanded again. Not just to protect Piper, but to stand steady while rumors tried to rearrange our reality. The next wave didn't come with thunder. It came as small, persistent taps, calls, texts, and the kind of concerned lectures that sound like love but feel like a trap. Aunt Carol called first. I could hear the sympathy laced in her voice even before she spoke. "I heard what's going on," she said. "Your mother is devastated. Monica is heartbroken. You know how sensitive Monica is. You need to be the bigger person, Diana." She said it slow, like she was handing me a piece of advice dressed up as concern. It was exactly the sort of soft pressure they'd always used to wear me down. Then Mark, my cousin, sent a text that could have been copy-pasted from a television drama. "Family is family," it read. "Whatever happened, you all need to work it out. Don't be so dramatic." No one had bothered to ask me for my side. No one had called to see if Piper was okay. The only narratives that mattered were the ones that let Mom and Monica be victims. They'd rehearsed their lines and handed them out to relatives like party favors. More calls came, each one a tiny assault. Some people pleaded, others scolded. A few tried to guilt me back into the cheap, old habit of apologizing for being the only person who wouldn't lie for them. The strangest part was how many voices I recognized, people I'd trusted, people who'd come to birthday parties and baby showers. They sounded like strangers reading from a script. I kept my answers short and the same. "This is a private matter between me, my sister, and my mother," I told each caller. "I appreciate your concern, but I will not be discussing it." I said it without yelling, without pleading. My voice felt steady, the way it does in a meeting when you present facts and there's no room left for theatrics. After a few repeated responses, the calls thinned. The flying monkeys had done their work, spread the worry, softened me up, but they didn't get the collapse they wanted. I'd closed the door before they could sweep in. Then Monica switched tactics and went wide. She recorded a video and posted it publicly on her Facebook page. The video was pure theater. She sat in the empty salon under soft lighting, a sad acoustic guitar track playing low behind her. Her eyes were red-rimmed and she held a hand to her chest as if the whole world had just turned against her. "This has been the worst week of my life," she crooned into the camera. "I poured everything I had into this dream. This small business was my heart. To be attacked like this, it breaks me." She didn't mention Piper or the poll. She didn't show any of the screenshots. She never had to. The video was a masterclass in omission. Friends, clients, and family shared it. The comments filled with pity. "You poor thing, people can be so cruel, we'll support you." A few people tagged friends who hadn't been at the salon in months, rallying sympathy that felt manufactured. Parents who hadn't seen the poll took the sad story at face value and began to ask questions the wrong way. The narrative she wanted, small business owner ruined by a nasty sister, spread faster than any correction could follow. It was the sort of thing that sticks in people's heads because it asks for an emotional response before it leaves room for facts. For a hot second, I wanted to match her theatrics. I pictured myself standing in my living room, holding up every screenshot, every highlighted bank line, every cruel comment. I wanted to point at the camera and demand that people look at what they'd been told to ignore. But Eric, who had become my calm center in the storm, put a hand on my knee and said, "Do the thing that keeps us steady, not the thing that keeps you loud." He reminded me of the mission: protect Piper, keep our life intact. "Rage is satisfying in a moment," he said, "but long-term, it makes a mess you have to clean up later." So I went back to the thread in the Westwood Elementary Parents group. The original post was still at the top, comments spinning in a mix of outrage and confusion. I didn't make a video, I didn't post a rant, I typed a simple, measured comment. For clarity, here is a simple timeline of events. I then listed the facts, one by one, in plain language: the date Piper got the haircut, the date a public poll went up mocking a child, the date I stopped financial support, and that any fallout after that was a consequence of those decisions. I attached the poll screenshot again, the same image that had started this whole thing. No accusations more than the evidence showed, no name-calling, just facts laid out like a line of stones across a river. The response wasn't instant vindication, but it did something else. It gave context back to people who were willing to read. A few parents thanked me for being clear. Sarah messaged, quietly relieved. A couple of Monica's longtime clients removed their support without drama, simply saying they preferred to take their business elsewhere. The calm approach didn't stop Monica from telling her story, it didn't erase the video or the whispers. But it did plant a counterweight, a record of what had actually happened that couldn't be waved away by a sad song and teary eyes. Weeks started to feel less frantic. The gym of accusations had more empty seats. I hung on that slow silence and let it do its work. Then, one Saturday while I was doing a deep clean of our home office, I found a folder that made my stomach drop all over again. Tucked behind stacks of old tax receipts and a pile of project binders was a dusty accordion file labeled in Monica's handwriting, "Monica Salon." I hadn't seen it in years. The flap was brittle when I opened it, and the smell of old paper rose up, dusty, a little like a library that had shut its doors for the night. Inside were the papers from when I helped Monica get started. There were receipts for chairs and a counter, invoices for paint, a glossy brochure for the opening, and then, folded under everything, was a copy of the loan agreement from a small local bank, the one I had co-signed 5 years earlier. I recognized the $24,000 number immediately. I remembered signing those papers at the bank, the polite conversation about business plans, the way Monica's fingers had trembled when she said the salon would finally be hers. But something felt off as I scanned the page. The numbers were the same, but the terms were grimmer, the payment notes more aggressive. My memory of the loan structure didn't match what the paper showed. A small, nagging doubt that I'd buried years ago started to prick at me like sand under the skin. The folder seemed to close around that doubt and squeeze. I kept turning pages, my heart beating in my throat, waiting for whatever other small betrayals might fall out with the old receipts. I had given Monica a personal check for $24,000 the day she asked for it. She and Mom had told me it was for deposits, chairs, inventory, the stuff you need to open a shop. I remembered signing the check at my kitchen table, watching Monica cry with relief, picturing her sweeping the floor of a place that would be hers. It felt like an investment in a family dream. But when I found that folder, the dates on the documents didn't line up. The loan agreement from the bank was dated the week after I wrote the check, and in the folder, tucked beneath receipts, was a letter from Monica to Mom, all frantic handwriting and torn edges. The letter said the bank might deny her loan because of an old car loan she hadn't finished paying and some missed payments on a credit card. She asked for help to get her application to look better, to make the numbers work. Reading it felt like watching a magician reveal the trick. The $24,000 I thought was seed money wasn't for furniture or paint. It was cash that sealed the loan, the down payment that convinced the bank to approve the application. They used my money to make the account look better, to hide the holes in her credit. It wasn't just naive help. It was a setup. I sat on the floor of the office with the papers spread around me like evidence in a slow-motion crime scene. The air felt too thin. I thumbed through receipts for salon chairs and a rent deposit, everything ordinary and mundane, and then the loan agreement itself. My name as cosigner, Monica's name as borrower, numbers that added up in a way that suddenly made me the one responsible if the business failed. My stomach turned over. I felt the sick realization that they'd built a financial scaffolding out of my credit and my cash, and I hadn't been told. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was a quiet, methodical kind of theft. They'd taken my trust and folded it into a business plan without telling me the full cost. For years, I had justified the money, helping family, keeping a roof over Mom's head, keeping the salon afloat. Now it was clear some of those transfers had been papered over, shuffled, and turned into something that would one day come back to bite me. That thought made my hands go cold. The next day, the mailbox offered more proof that the quiet had teeth. There was an envelope with a law firm's name I didn't recognize, thick with photocopies, and a notice that made my chest compress like someone had wrapped my ribs too tight. It was from a collections agency, a demand for a balance on the loan I had co-signed, $18,650 plus fees. The number blurred for a second as I read it aloud, then again until it landed like a physical blow. My mind started calculating in the small, frantic way it does when something precious is threatened. That amount was most of our emergency savings, what we'd set aside for broken furnaces and unexpected car repairs, even a sliver of Piper's future college money. I could picture the spreadsheet in my head, the neat columns of planned expenses, and then this jagged red line cutting through them. The house felt suddenly smaller, the windows too thin against a cold world. I called the number on the letter. The voice on the other end was polite and practiced. They told me that because I had co-signed the loan, the bank could ask me to pay. There was no lecture, no blaming tone, just the plain statement of fact. My stomach dropped further when they explained that the salon had been delinquent for months, that notices had been sent, that attempts to collect had not worked. Monica had defaulted. The bank had closed the account and turned the debt over. I remember slumping into the kitchen chair, the paper crumpling a little under my grip. Eric came home from work and saw my face before I spoke. You could tell from his posture, his shoulders folding, the way he set his bag down slower than usual, that the news landed on him like ice water. We spread the notice on the counter and stared at the number as if it were a dangerous animal we needed to keep an eye on. There was a rush of practical questions. If the bank came after us, could we manage a payment plan? Would our credit be hurt? How fast would they escalate? We didn't have answers in that moment, only a shared, heavy dread. The collection notice changed things from emotional betrayal to real-world consequence. This wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about the roof over our heads and the future we'd tried to protect. I did what I always do when faced with a problem. I called Mom. For the first time since I had blocked her, I unblocked her number and pressed the green button with hands that felt unfamiliar and shaky. The phone rang twice and then filled with the small, brittle sound of her voice. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, that practiced warmth I know so well. I didn't waste time on niceties. "I got a letter from collections," I said. "Why am I on the hook for Monica's loan?" There was a long pause, the kind that stretches thin and sounds like someone counting their options. Then Mom sighed. The defense was gone from her voice. "We didn't want to worry you," she said finally. "Monica's credit is a mess. The bank warned us. We thought if you co-signed it would go through. We needed your good name, Diana." Those words, "we needed your good name," were meant to flatter, to turn my reliability into a compliment. To me, they sounded like an accusation and an excuse wrapped together. I felt anger, but it was a cold, focused thing rather than the hot flare I might have expected. I wanted to pin her words to the wall and make her see how small and mean they were. "Do you understand what that means?" I asked. "You used my credit and then asked me for $24,000. You put my family at risk." She made a small noise, half protest, half plea. "We did what we had to do, Diana. You always were the responsible one. You always could handle it." The familiar pattern was there, praise folded into guilt. They'd relied on me to be the adult who would fix everything, and they took that for granted until the bill came due. Whatever softness I felt toward Mom fractured in that moment. I had hoped for some shame, some recognition that they'd crossed a line. Instead, I heard justification. I let the silence hang for a beat, listening to the phone and to my own blood. "This was a plan," I said quietly, "not a mistake." Her response was a fragile string of reasons, none of them real apologies. When she finally admitted they had known Monica's credit would fail, I felt something close to grief for the version of my family I had imagined, people who would protect each other, not use one another. For the first time in all of this, any small hope I had that they'd change or that they were simply caught in a bad moment evaporated. The betrayal wasn't a one-off error. It was a deliberate choice, and I had been turned into the shield they used without my full consent. It left a raw, hollow place inside me, heavy and steady. When I showed the collections notice to Eric, the color drained from his face like the light leaving a room at dusk. He sat down hard on the edge of the counter and ran a hand through his hair until he looked like he hadn't slept in days. $18,650, he said slowly, each number a small, dangerous thing. That's our emergency fund, that's 3 months of pay, that's Piper's savings." He started pacing the way people do when they're trying to move anxiety through their bodies. "We've been careful," he said. "We were saving for things that matter. If we lose that, we're exposed." His hands were restless, fidgeting with a coffee mug, drumming his thumb against the table. For the first time since this all began, I saw the strain in his face, the way the fight I'd started was bleeding into the life we were supposed to be protecting together. He'd been my partner in the quiet war against my family for days, steady and supportive, but a number like that shifts the whole picture. He stopped in front of me, and his voice was softer than when he'd told me he was proud. "Maybe we should just pay it," he said. "Maybe we should cut our losses and be done with it. I can't watch us lose everything over pride." His words felt like betrayal at first. I'd expected him to stand shoulder to shoulder, come what may. Instead, he listed things I hadn't wanted to trade: our savings, Piper's future. He was looking at the practical map of our lives and asking if the fight was worth the risk. I bristled because in my mind this wasn't pride, it was protection. I had built boundaries to keep my child safe, but his fear was real and it landed like a weight across my chest. If we pay it, I said, they learn they can do this again. They learn that if they push hard enough, we'll fix the mess. He stopped pacing and stared at me, the man who usually quieted storms in my head with a joke or a plan. Now his eyes were tired, and for the first time I felt the heavy, urgent truth. Standing up to them would cost us, maybe everything. The silence between us lasted a long time. I could hear Buddy's nails clicking on the hardwood, the low hum of the refrigerator, normal life trying to continue while our world was being taken apart. Eric's suggestion wasn't cruelty. It was fear speaking in a language I understood. Protect what you can, avoid ruin. I felt alone for a moment in a way that had nothing to do with my marriage. It was the isolation of someone who'd pulled a thread and watched a sweater unravel. But even as worry wrapped around me, a small, cold stubbornness settled in. I had seen the receipts. I had pulled the folder from the cabinet. I knew what had been done. If I paid, the pattern would continue. If I didn't, we might lose money. Either way, something would be broken. I looked at Eric and saw a man who loved us and feared losing what we had built. I reached out and took his hand. We figure this out together, I said. But I'm not going to pay for their choices just to make them comfortable. He didn't answer right away. He pressed his thumb to my knuckles and let out a breath that sounded like acceptance and surrender tangled up. This was the crack in our armor, the place where principle met survival. The cost of standing up had shifted from emotional currency to something with teeth. I felt the weight of it settle in my bones, and I understood, in that quiet way people understand the rules of a fight, what we had to do next. The next morning, I got an email from Miss Albright, the principal, asking me to come in right away. My stomach dropped before I even read the whole thing. Her office smelled like lemon cleaner and paper, and the clock above her door ticked loud enough to make me count breaths. She was kind, calm in that professional way that makes you feel both cared for and on trial. There's been a report from another parent, she said without beating around the bush. They're concerned about a family situation that's being discussed online. We have to follow up whenever there's a possible risk to a child. She used careful language, child welfare, concern, but I heard it the way every mother hears it. An implied question about my fitness, about whether my home was safe. I told her the truth, stripped of drama. I explained the poll, the screenshots, the way Monica had posted it, and my decision to pull financial support. I explained that I'd blocked contact and was trying to protect Piper. Miss Albright listened, fingers steepled, then wrote a note. We'd like to make sure Piper is okay and to offer resources if you need them, she said. Sometimes when something goes public, kids can get picked on. We want to be proactive. There was a form to sign acknowledging she'd spoken to me, a box to check that said the school would monitor social interactions and report any changes in Piper's behavior. Her tone was neutral, but the act felt huge. Another adult now watching, another official record that something in our family had spilled into the public sphere. I left her office with a folder of pamphlets about bullying and a quiet hum of humiliation crawling up my neck. It was another way the fight had found a path straight to my daughter's life. The school had always been a place of refuge for me and for Piper. Having it become another place where our family's troubles were aired felt like a fracture opening wider. That afternoon, I went to pick up Piper. She climbed into the car without her usual run toward Buddy or a chatter about the day. She buckled her seatbelt with slow fingers and stared out the window like the world was a painting she'd lost interest in. "What's wrong, sweetie?" I asked, my voice soft because the last few weeks had taught me to speak very gently. Her lower lip trembled. She looked smaller than she had the week before, like someone had taken a bite out of her and left a hollow. "Ashley said her mom told her not to play with me anymore," she said, the words small and brittle. "She said you were mean, and that's why my aunt lost her job and we don't see Grandma." The phrase landed like a stone. In that instant, I tasted metal, anger, and helplessness braided together. The campaign my family had launched had spread, and now it had begun to live in a third grader's whisper. At home, she sat at the kitchen table, pushing crumbs around without eating. I tried jokes, I tried stories about bees and planets, but she kept folding inward. Later she told me in a voice that made me want to break glass that kids at recess had asked if she was the reason Grandma and Aunt Monica were sad. I told her the truth in a way she could hold, that sometimes grown-ups make selfish choices and that none of it was her fault. I kissed the top of her head and promised we'd make new friends and new holidays. Still, it was a thin comfort when the playground had turned into a courtroom. 2 nights later was the school fundraiser, the big event everyone talked about for weeks. Eric and I debated whether to go. It felt like showing up to watch actors perform our life, but staying away would look like hiding. We decided to go and to be ordinary in the middle of chaos. The gym smelled like popcorn and floor wax. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Tables full of trinkets and baskets lined one wall. A few volunteers poured lemonade while kids ran past with cotton candy fingers. I felt the weird, prickly energy of a crowd that could turn on you or cheer you up depending on which version of the story they'd heard. We walked in with Piper between us, hand in hand. My heart beat like it wanted to leave my chest. We had barely crossed the room when I saw them. Monica and Mom were standing near the silent auction table, half a small group gathered around them. Mom had a handkerchief to her face and Monica's arm was around her. They'd chosen the best public stage in the town, the most sympathetic setup, a small business owner ruined, a matriarch heartbroken. It was a show and I felt like I'd been dragged into the front row. As we approached, Mom turned and made eye contact with me in a way that said she'd been rehearsing this moment. Then she started walking toward us, shoulders hunched as if the weight of the world were on them. Monica's group broke like a wave, eyes sliding to us, hungry for a narrative. Parents murmured, some casting glances our way. Piper gripped my hand tighter and I could feel her little fingers trembling. Mom took 2 big, dramatic steps and reached for my arm. Her voice was loud enough for the nearby table to hear, a mixture of hurt and stagey outrage. "Diana, thank God you're here," she said, tears already at the edges of her eyes. "Please, we can't do this anymore. Your sister is devastated. The salon is closed, the house is being taken from us, we've lost everything." She let the words hang like ornaments, polished and designed to catch the light and everyone's sympathy. She looked like the wronged mother I'd seen in 1,000 family photos. "Just talk to us," she pleaded, the kind of public plea that's meant to make the person being asked look like the villain in front of strangers. The circle of parents watching shifted their weight, some faces soft with pity, others waiting for the drama to unfold. I felt the gym go quiet in the space inside my chest where the rage had been waiting. This was it, the moment where they expected me to crumble, apologize, accept the apology they'd never offered, and buy them back a life they'd been living on my money. I stepped back, and for a second the world was only that movement and the way Piper's knees knocked slightly against mine. The cameras on phones lifted, not for anything viral but as witnesses. People like witnesses when a small town tries to decide whose story will stick. Mom's reach for me was earnest in a way meant to shame me into being small. My mind cataloged the receipts, the screenshots, the bank transfers, the way Mom had told me to be the adult who could fix things. I felt the cold logic of all the proof form into a kind of shield around my ribs. I wasn't going to be the person who made a messy problem look pretty just so everyone else could sleep better. "Talk," I said, my voice steady without being loud. Around us, the chatter dropped. I glanced at the parents gathered, at the PTA board on the wall, at the silent auction basket labeled Family Fun Day. My voice didn't tremble. "If you want to talk, we'll do it where the truth matters." I looked not at my mother but at the small crowd that had paused to watch. My voice stayed steady because I'd practiced saying the facts out loud until they didn't shake me. "Since my mother has made this a public issue," I said, "I'm happy to provide some public clarity." I turned my phone and held the poll screenshot up so everyone could see it. The laughter and the mean comments were there in black and white. I watched faces change from curiosity to shock. A few people leaned in as if proximity would make it less terrible. Then I swiped to the bank statements. I showed the highlighted transfers labeled for the house and the matching withdrawals from Mom's account going to Monica's card. People read over my shoulder. I could feel the weight of the receipts doing the work I'd waited years to have them do. There were small noises, gasps, the rustle of chairs, the soft clink of silverware as the volunteers stopped mid-task. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something cooler, the long relief of truth landing where it would matter. Finally, I pulled out the collection notice and held it up. "And this is the last straw," I said. "This is a bill I'm being asked to pay because I co-signed a loan I was never given the whole story about." I kept my voice low and even. The words explained the pattern. How my willingness to help had been taken advantage of, how kindness had been turned into leverage. Monica and Mom had 100 faces in that moment, hurt, outrage, then the slow, dawning panic of people who'd been exposed. Someone asked a question, not mean but simply curious. "What happens now?" I looked at Piper, who was holding Eric's hand, then back at the group. "We do right by the child in this story," I said. "We stop pretending hurting a kid is a small joke. We hold adults accountable for choosing to harm a child." A few parents came over to thank me quietly. A couple of longtime clients of Monica's hugged me and said they were sorry they hadn't known. No one cheered, no one called me a hero. They just listened, and that felt like enough. After that night, things changed in a way that was gradual and then sudden. For weeks there was silence where once there had been noise. No new messages from Mom or Monica, no more guilt-laced calls from cousins. The parents who had paused at the fundraiser kept a distance from Mom and Monica, not out of cruelty, but because the evidence had changed what they trusted. The mother who'd filed the anonymous report to the school wrote me a personal note retracting it and apologizing for the trouble she'd caused. That apology was small and late, but it mattered. Monica's salon, starved of referrals and community support, closed its doors within 6 weeks. I watched as an auction sign went up in the window and then, a few days later, the for lease sign. People in town who'd been friendly stopped stopping by, and the silence of the empty shop felt final. Monica packed what she could into a small truck and moved 2 hours away to a friend's place. I heard about it the proper way, through neighbors and a few mutually trusted friends, because she hadn't wanted to cause more scenes. Mom couldn't keep up with the house on her own. The bank began the process, and in time, the house went to someone else. She moved into a small apartment across town, the kind of place where you own less and owe less. It was practical, not glamorous, and she hated it. I won't pretend I took pleasure in that. The cost of their choices was concrete and painful. They lost more than a business or a house. They lost the safety net they'd relied on me to provide. I felt no gloating in their fall. I felt a quiet, clean peace, not victory so much as the settling after a storm. I had boundaries now that would hold. I had a family in this house that would not let a child be mocked for likes and clicks. That peace was steady and normal in a way that was deeply healing. It allowed me to look forward without the low-grade anxiety that had lived in my chest for years. The following spring, we planted our first vegetable garden in the backyard. The sun was warm and the soil smelled like hope and dirt, two things I hadn't realized I missed until I buried my fingers in the earth. Piper ran around chasing a butterfly with dirt on her knees and a ribbon in her hair. Her laugh cut through the memory of the pole the way sunlight melts frost. She was different, braver, or perhaps just freer. She'd stood up at school once in front of her class to tell them she was okay, and the teacher had smiled with a kind of quiet pride that felt like a gift. We filled the empty holidays with new traditions. Instead of forcing a family portrait where everyone smiled through something ugly, we invited friends over, people who actually showed up when it mattered. Sarah and her kids brought burgers and lawn chairs and a potato salad that tasted like summer. We started a small second Thanksgiving in December because a lot of people couldn't travel then. It was messy and crowded and full of laughter that wasn't tied to obligation. That was the kind of family I wanted to give Piper, not one stitched together by debts and expectations, but one built from presence and choice. Piper came to me one afternoon and hugged my leg. "Do you think they'll ever say sorry?" she asked, earnest and small. I told her that real apologies take work and sometimes people never do the work. "I will always stand up for you," I said instead, simple, true, and promised without drama. She smiled then in a way that didn't ask anything of me except to keep my word. That felt like everything. If you've ever had to set a hard boundary to protect someone you love, share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about finding quiet strength and standing up when it matters.